the way you structure your team and the way they and the systems that are set up in place for them to communicate with each other can impact the type of work that they do together quite a lot.
Yo, 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 what up? It's Jordan from the Music Business Podcast. Today, I am super excited to introduce our guest, Andrea Magdalena. She's the founder of a nonprofit called She Said So, which promotes inclusion, diversity, collaboration, and community in the music industry, primarily for women and gender minorities. It was founded in 2014, and since then has grown to 18 chapters and over 15,000 members. So today, we get into what it was like building She Said So. We get into what it was like building a community, not just locally, but internationally. And we also get into her past experience with strategic partnerships. She's also worked with Microsoft, YouTube, Sonos, the list goes on, and the intersectionality between tech and music. Really excited for you guys to hear this one. I think that's something that we haven't gotten into the podcast much is diversity and inclusion explicitly as we want to. And I'm glad that we get into it today. So whether you're into the music tech space, whether you want to start a business yourself, whether you want to start a nonprofit, or you want to learn how to speak out at your organization against inequalities, I think this is all relevant for you. So there's a lot of stuff to learn here. Really excited for you guys to hear it today. Let's get into it. Hey, Andrea, thank you so much for virtually coming out.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jordan. How's it going?
I'm good. I actually just got back from vacation recently, so I'm like in a very chipper mood. So how are you doing?
Well, I haven't been on a holiday yet, but I've just moved into a new house. So feeling really good about everything, inspired, fresh perspective, all that.
Exactly. Weirdly, one of my favorite parts about moving into a new apartment is decorating. So hopefully you're having a good time, like choosing where the furniture should go and things like that. It's like my favorite part.
Yeah, I love it too. It's a slow process for me. I'm trying to not make it into a stressful thing. So we got the basics covered. And then from here on out, I'm just going to take my time.
Yeah. Awesome. So I guess before we kind of get started and to dig a little bit deeper into She Said So, before we even get to that, what do you think of the value sets, maybe 2 or 3 that have afforded you the success so far that you've reached in your career?
I love this question, because I feel like it kind of helps me define myself to myself better, and something I need to continuously remind myself of. I'd say definitely resilience and perseverance, because I come from a background where, I'm from Romania. My family is pretty kind of like lower income, middle, lower income.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've really had to fight hard for everything that I had and not let myself be, stopped or interrupted by the obstacles that came my way. So resilience is a big one, but also kindness and empathy. I would put those in the same bucket, because everything about life is about people, is about the relationships, right. Or not so much the relationships, but maybe the interactions, even if it's just a simple hi and bye to, the lady who sells you something at the store. Even that micro interaction there, to me, I like to make the most of it and make it pleasant, and by being kind to the other person I'm talking to. So that's kind of my number one rule. And thirdly, I'd say, hard work. I don't know if that's necessarily something that you're born with or develop in time, probably a little bit of both, but to have this determination to put in the hard work beyond any sort of cards that life has given you. It's important. You might think that people who are born with everything, they got it all, but no, they need to put in, those who truly succeed in the long term, really put in the work. So that's kind of what it takes, in my opinion.
Nice. Yeah. A couple of ones I would consider are on my list too. And the biggest one that you said is empathy. Especially like in the music industry, working with artists,
Mm.
working with people that take what they do so seriously, and it's such a core part of who they are as human beings. Like empathy is, you have to lead with empathy, in my opinion, you know. But not just that, but also the people working with the artists, people like me and you. All of us deserve a lot of empathy in general in the world, you know. But that's definitely one of the values that I take like very seriously. So that's really cool that you said that. Resilience, perseverance, hard work. Perseverance, I guess, is an interesting one because you said like, you know, maybe you're not, maybe you're born with it, maybe you're not, maybe it's a little bit of both. But I feel like as I continue in my career, part of that perseverance and part of that hard work comes from my motivations and figuring out what those motivations are in order to cultivate those things. So I'm sure people are born with hard work because maybe they were surrounded by it. Like you said, your family comes from a lower middle class home. You've seen hard work a lot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think something that I'm realizing now, as I'm mentioned closer to 30, is that cultivating those motivations to exemplify those values is kind of how I figured out how to do those things. So
I love that. It's so important to keep asking the why. You know, I think it's one of the most important questions anyone can ask themselves.
Right.
Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I choosing this? Or why am I in this situation that's, you know, out of my control? And what can I do to make it more mine? Yeah. So that's like tying in really nicely with motivation and finding it when maybe you're having one of those days where it's more difficult to find it.
Absolutely. Awesome. So I guess jumping headfirst into She Said So, kind of give me the background on how it started. First of all, starting an organization like this is like very courageous, I feel like, in the music industry in general. I'm sure I know you have. I definitely have, as a minority, have gone through things in the music industry I wish I did not. I'll just say that. But starting an organization about it and bringing it to light and making it a conversation is super courageous. So I guess I kind of have two questions. One, what's the background of She Said So? How did it start? But also, what compelled you to actually do it? Like, obviously, I have these conversations with people in the music industry all the time about sexism, racism, so on and so forth. But what compelled you to actually do something about it?
Thank you for asking me this. Firstly, I should say She Said So exists as an organization completely by chance. It was never something that I set out to do as a goal of mine. You know, this is something that I want to do in my career, start my own organization with a social impact. Not at all. My background is actually in tech. I started my music industry career on the streaming side of things, on the tech side of things. And that's what got me into the industry more so. And, you know, I obviously noticed issues in terms of representation and discrimination, and just inclusion overall in both sectors, both in tech and in music. And what I found to be very different between the two was maybe the attitude that they were both kind of tackled with. There was this openness and kind of desire to make things better in the tech space, whereas in the music industry, it was almost something like that wasn't really talked about at that time, right? We're talking end of 2014.
Yeah,
that's when I decided to take things in my own hands and build my own community of women who help each other out, because I didn't find that. I found quite a lot of competition and animosity and like who's cooler than who, or maybe, you know, a lot of being ignored in the industry at the time. You know how it is. It's hard to get a foot in the door unless that's already kind of set up for you, or you happen to come across that opportunity. Sometimes it's complete luck, to be honest. That's the thing with the music business. It's not like science where you need to follow these very rigid steps in order to get to this level in the industry. It's quite open, and that's great, but that's also difficult because there isn't one manual that people can follow to get in it. So anyway, that was the inspiration behind She Said So at that time. The fact that I did see women around me in that world, but what I noticed was that they all tended to be on the younger side, and they all tended to be part of the, scheduling, admin kind of conversation, but not part of the decision making process. So I realized, obviously there aren't enough women at the top, and that's something I personally want to achieve for myself and for others in my situation. So my solution to that problem was creating a community. At that time, I was working as a community manager at Mixcloud. And I was all about building community and, interacting with people, with music industry people, with artists, with execs, you name it, with everybody. And so I was noticing all of these things from firsthand experience. I noticed there aren't enough female DJs. I noticed those who were, when we're backstage together, we're being treated like we're the girlfriends. Like we need to have a whole conversation with the bouncer to convince them that we are part of the crew or we're the talent or whatever, stuff like this. That's quite subtle and it's not a huge amount of drama or trauma involved in this, but the issue is that it's super prevalent, and that's just the less extreme form of sexism that other women experience. It can get pretty ugly, as we've seen with cases like R. Kelly and so on. So we don't want things to get to that point, right? We want to cut them from the get-go. And so my solution, one of the solutions that I thought could work, is to bring women together to at least help each other out, create this sense of community and sisterhood, and using that collective force to apply pressure on the industry. And then, fast forward a couple of years, the word spread really fast. I guess there was really a need for something like this to exist. And then, she said, so it became an organization because all of a sudden everybody wanted to be a part of it. And collectively, our voice as women really was heard to the point where, we started getting invited to do things and brand partnerships and all that stuff. And that's kind of what pushed me into taking it from an idea or a side project that I wanted to do purely out of passion to something that exists as an organization and operates as such as well.
Right. Was that decision for you scary at all, or did it just seem like something that was an easy next step? I'm only asking because myself, speaking out against situations that I may be in that make me uncomfortable isn't always the easiest thing to do. So at that point, was it a little bit scary going into it, or was it like fuck yeah, let's do it? You know what I mean?
I'll have to admit it was and continues to be scary. I think that when you speak out, there are some doors that open and then there are some doors that close when you do so. And, it's a case of acknowledging that and not letting that deter you. And so there was a bit of scare because of that. But also because what am I signing up for? Right. What am I going to do with a job? I think at that time specifically, I was actually transitioning. I was moving from London to LA. I had decided that I'm going to move to LA. Initially, I came here with my Mixcloud job and I was supposed to go back after a while. And so I decided to not go back and stay in LA instead. So that's when I had a bit more time in between jobs to actually, take care of all this She Said So stuff and set it up so it operates more sustainably as an organization. I have to admit, it's been so great ever since. Because I treated, it is, there is a, huge activist component to what I do, of course, but I like to treat it like a startup, not like a charity. And I run it, and I try to, from a structural perspective, I run it like such, I have two sort of people on contract that I work with, and designers and other creatives that I work with on a project basis, almost like an agency model. And we develop, I think this is my, preferred place to be in, at the intersection of music, technology, and culture or entertainment. It's coming up with creative ideas to to bring forward our mission. That's a positive one. And you can do that through music, you can do that through events, you can do that through community design and panels and, brand partnership campaigns. It's such a fun challenge to embark on.
Right. That's super cool. I have so many questions. I have to like cut some down. I guess before we kind of get away of the scary part, because that's something that I have personal experience with as well. How do you balance the work that you do with your nonprofit with the other work that you do in the music industry? I know that as soon as the word like woke to me is like my favorite and least favorite word at the same time, because people can use it positively and negatively. So, and then as soon as you are deemed like woke, people are either pigeonholing you or they're saying like, good job. So, but it just depends on who it's coming from. So I guess in your situation, you have this nonprofit. How do you stand out in a way that's productive? How do you stand out in a way that doesn't pigeonhole you into, she's just the person that believes these things because she's a woman? How do you kind of get around that? And how have you been productive doing that for people who may want to do that within their own organizations,
I have to say it's a difficult journey to be on, because people always have this tendency of labeling. It's just easier for someone to put one label on rather than understand the whole complexity that makes you who you are, right?
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I'm sure in a lot of people's heads, I am the she said so person. I'm not also the marketing expert or brand partnerships expert or expert on all these other or business owner. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes people forget about that, and I'm still kind of on that journey of figuring that out here in the States, to be honest, because there is a huge and very stark difference between how you sell yourself in UK and Europe and how you sell yourself within a music industry context here in the US. It's two very different strategies, and I'm pretty good at the Euro version. And here I'm still kind of learning how to, properly, unapologetically sell my skills beyond my knowledge of the empowerment, of the gender empowerment space. And it's not easy, but sometimes it's a case of, doing this kind of proactive work, reaching out to people like yourself to, have a conversation about she said so, but also about things beyond that. And that will very clearly showcase, that I have this kind of experience in other spaces as well. More practically speaking, right now, I'm actually taking on, other than running She Said So, I'm doing some freelance work, some consultant work for an agency. They're a brand and product studio, and currently I'm part of two quite big projects. One is developing the new design dashboard for an e-commerce platform. Wow. So I'm a producer on that project, which is doubling down as a project manager and as a strategist. So that's kind of advertising, digital agency creative space. And there's so many lessons I'm taking from that space and applying them to running She Said So, to running my agency together with my husband. Actually, him and I, we started an agency called IMJT. And right now it's mostly him that's running it as a management company. He's managing 3 artists as part of that. So nice. Sometimes I'm involved in that too, nice. I think it's a case of constantly, contributing to the conversation outside of the empowerment space, and making sure that you have a voice in other verticals that you want to be seen in.
Right.
By, sharing content, right? Contributing with tweets to this thread that is happening that everybody else is on their toes about, and so on. It's hard not to be pigeonholed, but I guess in the same way you're creating space for yourself in that area, you kind of have to put in the work for your voice to be heard in other verticals as well.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that makes total sense. Speaking of, I kind of want to dig into some business development stuff as well. A lot of questions just about building a company in general. I guess I'll just start with the first one. You brought up, you know, kind of solidifying your brand overseas and doing that here, but you also have like 10 chapters in a bunch of different countries, and I'm sure culturally they're all not the same. So how do you, from a business development perspective, account for that when you're hiring people, when you're bringing people on the team, and then two, how do you account for that in the way that the organization handles itself in those territories?
Well, I have to be honest here and admit that our growth still kind of follows an organic suit. Mm-hmm. So we go where the money's at. It's as simple as that. If this, if Spotify, you know what, actually, I'll mention YouTube Music because we're actually working with them right now on a project that's focused on Spain. Mm-hmm. And it's a mentoring program that we developed a few years ago, and that we're running in different sort of iterations, depending on the partner that we work with to fund it, essentially. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, you remember when I said that I run it like a startup versus a charity. It's in situations like this where, we developed a mentoring program that's a model, it's a framework that can be easily adapted. It's essentially a scalable program, right? It's something that companies like Microsoft and Facebook pay big money for because they're such a huge company and they want to know how to develop things that they can scale, but are just as impactful at an individual level as they are at a mass level. And so, we developed this model, and then over the past 4 years, I think it was 2017 when we launched it, we did 3-month mentoring schemes. We did 6-month-long mentoring schemes. We did it for 50 people. We did it for 5 people. We played around with the format so much that, we got to a point where we were pretty confident in how we adjust the dials. Nice. And so as a result of approaching the challenge in that way, and the community building in that way, we were able to apply that and adapt it to that specific market we were, nice. We wanted to focus on. And so, so far we've run the project in France and Italy last year as a virtual mentoring scheme, and we just launched a hybrid version it's called She Grows with YouTube Music in Spain this year.
Nice.
And so we did that in Spain. Firstly, we did have a chapter there. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, YouTube Music wanted to focus on that market. And so this was such a great fit for both of us because they were able to achieve their goals and they were able to double down on doing so in terms of, having a presence in the Spanish market whilst contributing to the, diversity and inclusion agenda. So it's really a double, triple win kind of thing. And as a result, we hired people in Spain to run this project, manage this project. Whereas starting a chapter is something that typically someone volunteers for. It's sticking to it, right? Because starting something is very easy, but continuing following through with it and keeping it alive and showing up day on day for a year or 6 months or however long you can, that is the hard part right there. And so people who show up like that for She Said So, raising their hand to start a chapter in Sweden or in Spain or Italy or whatever, they do so. And then if they stick around for long enough and, they really build a solid community following the framework and the model that we established as She Said So Global. And if they successfully do that for X amount of time, then they get to the stage where they can also unlock these sort of opportunities from brands, from partners, from grants, right? There isn't one, or from the community itself by charging for membership. So there is a lot of opportunity there that we typically tap into in a super organic way. Like, I don't want to push my agenda in Italy if that's not where people are, because the conversation around diversity is in different places in different countries of the world.
Exactly.
So you have to enter it where they're at, and provide them with the tools that make sense to them. Why would I want to force Italy to use WhatsApp if Facebook is their main sort of platform? So we're going to build the community on Facebook, not on WhatsApp.
Right.
That's kind of what I mean by being responsive and following the money in that sense.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And I'm sure obviously there was a lot of work behind it, but it all sounds really organic, which sounds really awesome. I guess kind of piggybacking off of that, the amount of territories, the amount of people, I believe over 10,000 people are a part of She Said So.
I think we're at 15,000 now, but we're broken into all these chapters around the world. So it's kind of, honestly, it's impossible because of privacy regulations, right? So it's kind of difficult to bring everybody under the same umbrella from a database perspective.
Right.
But yeah, there's around 15,000 of us dispersed across all the different chapters we have around the world.
Cool. So you worked in community at Mixcloud. You obviously are in charge of a very large community now. It sounds like community is going to be in the work that you do with artists, because it's about coalescing communities around those artists. What do you think are some of the key pillars in just building a community in general? And how do you think you've exemplified that through your work?
Oh, yay. I love this question. I haven't been asked
oh, nice.
about this in so long. And I used to do these talks specifically, from wearing my Mixcloud hat. So it's kind of nice to wear it again, and like put a little Said So logo on it too.
Nice.
Community building is so extraordinary because, if you really think about it beyond the professional term itself, it really is, like your family is a community, your neighborhood is a community, your city, your country. It can be scaled up and down as much as you want. Even two people together make a community, in my opinion. Any sort of collective, get together of people is a community in my eye. And it doesn't follow the formula 1 + 1 = 2. It's more like 1 + 1 = 1,000 sort of thing. The power of bringing people together is just really special. And to segue into your question, what are the pillars that make a community? I think bringing people together with a shared passion for something, or interest in something, or even hatred for something. I wouldn't recommend that, of course, but that could be one thing that that we've seen it. We've seen people come together for that. So anything that activates their emotional, triggers some sort of emotion in a person, I think that's a key component to building a community, because they have to care, right? They have to choose to show up in your community every day, to go out of their way, especially if it's a community that you're building as, it's not an integral part of someone's life, perhaps. It's a nice to do, or it's a nice to have. Those people really need to be extremely passionate about that thing in order to show up for you every day, because time is precious. And so making it easy for them. Now we're going into more practical stuff. I think that's kind of on a strategic, conceptual level. People need to care. People need to be emotionally triggered and activated in order to be a part of it, not just by name, but actively contribute to a community. And that's another really difficult thing to achieve. Actually, any community builder or manager will tell you that keeping engagement up, that's so hard. Getting people in the door at first, that's like the easy part. Keeping them in the loop, it's almost like with you showing up every day to your workout, right? Or your meditation practice. You're not going to become a meditator if you do it once. You have to really show up every day to become a member of that community. And so making it easy for them from a practical perspective in terms of tools, as I was saying earlier, I'm not going to build my community on Facebook if everybody I'm trying to make a part of my community, they're all on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. So follow them, see where they're moving, and make it easy for them to spend that time with you too, from a platform perspective. And then I guess you really have to build that system in place, and the platform itself is part of that system. How do you bring them in? How do you greet them? How do you place sort of moments in the community at what time strategically, with what frequency, in order to make them feel like something is going on, but without spamming them. These are all things that, this is like growth marketing territory at this point. Yeah. If you're really trying to optimize your community from that perspective, because right now I'm at a level where, I've built my community, they already exist. My focus is on optimizing our engagement. How do I make sure that more people can see all these things, these amazing things that we do for them, that they're paying to be a part of, basically through their contributions on Patreon for us. So I'm at a different level in my community where it's about retention more so than onboarding or like building from scratch. I at this point I'm like constantly trying to figure out, okay, do we do these community moments? We have weekly community moments, whether it's our weekly Wednesday co-working where we all kind of log into the app and we just have like a chat going, anyone who's there, in case you're still working from home or you're a solo entrepreneur like me and you don't have an office, right? Or you don't have colleagues to talk to, you can talk to other sets of members in that way. And people know that this is happening every week on Wednesday between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. Pacific time. That's, something that they can show up. So repetition is an important aspect of community building. That's kind of more in the practical, space. But honestly, I've read a lot of documentation about what it takes to build a successful community and so on. And honestly, the most successful practices that I've employed have been the ones where I just applied my intuition. Honestly, anyone, if you're like really passionate about something, and I know people say that in business as well. Speaking of, I just completed a super intense Harvard Business Online business course just now, because, I thought that's maybe what I need in order to run my business better from like an actual business perspective. And I learned, at the end of it all, I learned that I was already practicing a lot of these business mindsets or, tools or strategies without knowing that it's something they teach you in school. I just kind of intuitively went about it that way. So it's kind of nice to know, and it's refreshing to know that you don't need that sort of formal education in order to bring your community or your business to life.
Right. I mean, I'm sure there was an overlap because your community and your business is already like very large, but it's interesting that you use those sorts of types of resources. I've also considered getting into them just because the podcast is a community. So exactly. part of that question was asking for people who have communities themselves. A part of it was for me, for the community that we're trying to build around the podcast. Speaking of, I know we spoke about this a little bit earlier, but for people that are, starting businesses in the nonprofit space or not, you've sustained a level of growth over the past 6 years that's just remarkable. So what do you think are some of the keys into doing that, that you can kind of shed some light on?
I'm glad to know that our growth over the years seems remarkable, because from this side I'm like, I'm not doing enough, we're not growing enough, we're not reaching enough, how are we getting into the US, how are we going to get people to learn that we exist and stuff. So it's always about perspective, right? Depends on what side of the lens you're looking from.
Right.
But all jokes aside, we did indeed have a pretty steady organic growth. And again, I think in my case, well, actually, for me personally, brand was important. So building a brand that I am proud of and I'm, having fun with. I don't think that's necessarily crucial to, maintaining your business alive or even launching a successful business. But that was just something that I deeply cared about. To build a brand that's fun and consistent, and tackle that challenge from a more commercial place, because I have all this experience on the agency side of things,
right.
Helping big multinational brands build other brands from scratch. I really wanted to approach my little business in the same way, but at a much more scaled down version. And so I have a lot of, and that's kind of what it's keeping my motivation alive too, because I'm tackling, the growth of She Said So in a way that brings me pleasure and enjoyment. Like I'm really having a lot of fun working with our designers and our, and my copywriter and my marketing social media person to brainstorm ideas and develop strategies for socials that are fun. That's actually something that brings me a lot of joy. And we still haven't quite got to a point where they translate into hundreds of thousands of impressions and so on, but you can definitely see a steady growth. So I think it's working again at a super organic level. But building a brand, is, I think, an important aspect of any business, especially if you're not in the activist space, right? Because or in the non-charity space, because then all of a sudden that's one of your unique selling points, how you position your brand or how you position your brand within the market that you operate in. Look at me using all these business terms I learned from Harvard. Well done, HBS. Something actually stuck with me after those 4 months of grind. Well done me, Andrea. Market share and business. Yeah. Anyway, resuming. Staying. So the brand was a big one for me personally, and then sticking to your mission statement and to your values, whilst you continue growing. I know there's back in the day in the music business there used to be a lot of hate against selling out, right? Brand partnerships, artists kind of were collaborating with brands in that way. I feel like that's changed a lot, and part of it kind of has to do with this new trend of, being good and doing good becoming a cool thing, because that didn't used to be cool just, a handful of years ago. And so, basically building something that other people want to be a part of in a way that they find engaging and authentic, right? Authenticity is something that everybody keeps bringing up, especially in the music business. As an artist, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you build an authentic relationship with your fans? It's almost applicable and more or less the same way to our community, but in a slightly different way, because we're working with people who operate behind the scenes. We're not working with fans. We're working with the actors of this industry. So it's slightly different, but from a principle perspective, the same rules apply. Like put your money where your mouth is, basically. Like really mean what you're saying, and not just because it's Pride Month this month, but because that's something you stand by throughout the year.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just to give an example, side example. I've had to sometimes I lost my motivation. I have to be honest here too. I had points where I was just like, why am I doing this? I could be making at least twice as much money, probably working, following the formula, working in big tech or something like that, because that was going to be my trajectory, right? And it's hard sometimes to find a motivation, which is why you go back to your why question. And you try to find it there.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I guess, like, kind of closing out a little bit, two more questions. One are to kind of go back to what you said about branding. What are some of the questions that you ask yourself when solidifying your brand? And two, you obviously worked a lot in strategic partnerships. What are questions that you ask of the brand that you're working on behalf of to identify what partnerships may be successful for them? I guess let's just start there, because that was kind of a big question.
Yeah. And you know what? The answer is exactly the same as what I just said, which is starting with the why. Whenever a brand, for a couple of years, I did strategic partnerships for Microsoft. That was between Mixcloud and whatever I did next, which is advertising. Yeah. And so, at Microsoft, I was actually hired through a third-party agency as well, but we were pretty embedded in the product team. So funnily enough, we were hired by the product team, not the marketing team. And that's something that you learn when you join a big company like Microsoft, that the way you structure your team and the way and the systems that are set up in place for them to communicate with each other can impact the type of work that they do together quite a lot. And so with us being hired by product, we always had to, our why, or the answer to our why question always had to feed back into the data and to kind of go, forward with strategic partnerships that made strategic sense from a data perspective, more so than awareness and cultural conversation, community building, which is something that a completely different agency was hired to do as well. And their tactics were very different. Were a lot more, like experiential marketing, whereas in our case was a lot more product based. So when developing strategic partnerships, whether I do it for an artist or I'm on the other side, I'm on the brand side of things, especially when you're on the artist side of things, you really have to work with them to develop a concept that goes beyond the payout itself, which is, come on, let's face it, we know that when a brand comes together with an artist, there's the commercial aspect of things that motivates the artist, and the artists who do that very well, and they tend to build the strongest communities of fans that will stay loyal forever, the so-called super fans. They're the ones who leverage the right partnerships, even if it's maybe a brand that you feel like, it's like Nando's in the UK, this restaurant or whatever, that's like clearly not got to do anything with music in that sense. But you force the brand into introducing some sort of aspect to their campaign that, or slightly changing the campaign or your appearance in it, in a way that speaks to your fans, that where they feel like that authenticity actually exists. So it's not just about the money, but it brings some sort of value, whether to the fan, to the artist, in a way that goes beyond selling that product or selling that service, whatever there is. So again, authenticity and, answering the why in an authentic way is key. And from a more practical perspective, especially if you work at a brand where product matters more, It's all about the numbers and about marrying those objectives with the cultural aspect of developing partnership in music, because we know very well it really needs to tick that box as well. It needs to
Right.
be relevant, and it needs to be meaningful and authentic. I hope this answered
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
question
it
about
did.
strategic partnerships.
It definitely did.
Um,
It
there
definitely
is
did.
there is no one way when it comes to the strategy
Mhm.
part, and I guess where you can really have a ton of successes on the execution part, because that's something that you can easily um, improve and make more efficient, and become really data driven in.
Right. Awesome. Data is an interesting answer to that question, because I don't really have much experience with strategic partnerships, but even my ignorant self didn't really think about data as explicitly as saying that's a huge part of it. So that's definitely an interesting take on that, and something I'll have to look into after the episode. Cool. So I guess like last question, I was reading your bio, was going through She Said So, the website, and there's so
Mhm.
many things that you do. There's so many things that your organization does. What is next? What's next?
You know what? I'm taking this summer to think about it. That's my answer. I'm not even joking. I'm actually going through an exercise with
Mhm.
someone who I deem an advisor. He probably doesn't know that yet, but he's basically my advisor now. And he's helping me. The initial conversation was, okay, I want to improve my deck, because having a nice looking deck, pro tip right there,
Mhm.
is something that a lot of brands / potential sponsors care about.
Mm.
And so in helping me achieve that goal of improving my deck, we actually unlocked a much bigger question, which is, what is She Said So?
Mm.
What do I want it to be 5 years from now?
Right.
Because as I said, it's been very much a reactive kind of growth, us sort of organically responding to the needs of the community. And the why was very obvious why I'm doing this.
Right.
At this point, 7 years, almost 7 years, 6 years down the line into this journey, is the answer to why the same, or are we becoming something else?
Mm.
Do we want to become something else? Would it be more impactful if we were something else? So these are some of the questions that I'm asking myself right now. And what I do know for sure is that I really want it to continue being the community that it is today, where people really show up with their full selves, and they're so, kind, and they're so generous. They're shared their email address. The other day we had the VP of artist relations at SoundCloud kind of spend a whole hour with us, giving her tips, for like 15 of us. There
Wow.
weren't more. It was a
Right.
really intimate experience. Like, I'm going to give you my email address, la, la, la. Like creating that kind of, maintaining, not creating, because we already created, but maintaining that kind of spirit of collaboration. That's something I definitely want to do. And then as a secondary objective, I really want to achieve that through really cool, creative, interesting, and innovative ways. I want to engage with VR and AI and like new
Right.
tech in cool ways that are fun and help us further our mission. That's my biggest ambition, figuring out how to continue marrying this commercial kind of brand partnerships,
Right.
advertising space that I have quite a bit of experience in, with culture changing, trend setting, most importantly, community building aspect that I operate in within the music industry.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Well, looking forward to seeing that in execution.
Right
Great.
back at you.
Thanks. Uh, great. Well, thank you so much for coming out. I had a great time. Hope you did too.
Yeah,
And
same.
hope you have a good one.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me this platform. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Of course.
And the Music Business Podcast team.
Of course. All right. Talk soon. Well, that was a super great episode. I had a great time. I had to cut off some questions at the end there. I was like, damn it. But that's because I was just having such a good time asking those types of questions. Like I said in the intro, diversity and inclusion isn't something that we've gotten in enough on this podcast. So I'm super glad that we could do that today. One of the things I found really interesting was talking about how not to be pigeonholed when you're stepping up for equality. I think it's really easy for that to happen, especially in music. And it's really cool the way that she's been able to diversify what she stands for with the other things that she does in the music industry. So I think, I've learned a lot from this episode, especially as it pertains to that and building community, some stuff that I will put into practice immediately. And I hope you all learn too. So as always, please leave a review. Please follow us on at the Music Business Podcast Instagram at Music Business Podcast. And I'll see you next week. Have a good one.